Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Aaron the Sloth and welcome back to our low-cost lab build series. And in this episode we're going to be going beyond the basics and fully build out our domain controller using Windows Server 2019. In this episode we're going to cover how to properly install Active Directory, configure DNS, and create a structured user and group setup and enforce real-world security policies through group policy. This is the backbone of any enterprise network and a very, very critical piece for everything that we'll be doing going forward. This includes security monitoring with WASA, which we'll be covering in the next episode. So let's do a quick recap. In the last episode at the end, we renamed the server, we assigned it a static IP, but what we did not do was install ADDS or DNS. Now, ADDS and DNS have to be installed at the same time because ADDS relies on DNS in order for full functionality. So how we're going to start out this episode is by confirming that we have properly renamed the machine, properly assigned it a static IP, and then we're going to move forward with installing ADDS and DNS. So we are going to refer back to our Miro board for confirmation on the name of the server and its correct IP address that we've mapped out. Again, we're going to be trying to follow a standard naming convention, which is something that you'd see in essentially all enterprise environments. Naming your servers based on role, location, or function helps to avoid confusion and simplifies the management of machines, especially whenever you're working with multiple servers. Like, let's say, for example, I've got a DC in Texas and I've got a DC in Washington. So typically in a real environment, you would see TX DC01 for the Texas DC, and then for Washington, you'd see WADC02 or something along those lines. So note that Active Directory requires a consistent IP address in order for the Active Directory to actually work properly. Because if the server's IP address changes, which is what you'd get with DHCP setups, DNS will break, authentications will fail, and the domain will become unreachable. So we always want to manually set IP addresses, and for DNS, set the primary DNS to 127.0.0.1 so that it loops back to itself. This is so that it can resolve its own name and respond to domain lookups internally. So let's jump right into it. Okay, now that we're here, we're going to install the ADDS and DNS server roles through Server Manager. These roles work hand in hand as Active Directory uses DNS constantly to locate domain controllers, replicate data, and handle logins. That's why essentially DNS is automatically integrated into the AD setup process. So we're going to go over here to Manage, Add Servers and Features. You can read through this if you'd like. We're just going to go ahead and click on Next. Make sure that role-based or feature-based installation is selected. Next. Make sure that our server is selected and make sure that here it's got the correct IP address and the correct name. We already know that. Click on Next. And now we're going to select Active Directory Domain Services and DNS Server. And as you can see, we already have some features that are absolutely required for Active Directory domain services. So we're just going to go ahead and click on Add Features. And then, like I said, we're going to also go ahead and select DNS server. Go ahead and click Add Features. And now we have both ADDS and DNS servers selected. We should be good to go ahead and click on Next. So there are a lot of additional features that we can opt into if we'd like. You can feel free to go through all of these bit by bit and kind of see what all they can do. Some of them are very useful. Some of them, you may not need, for this one particular server, but then you may have a secondary Windows server that you want to use as a dedicated particular feature of Windows Server for your environment, and that's totally fine. That's totally normal in all sort of day-to-day environments. However, for this lab, we're just going to be keeping everything basic and essential, so we're just going to go ahead and click on Next. So again, this kind of just goes over what ADDS is, what it does, and some things to note. So let's go and read through this. ADDS stores information about users, computers, and other devices on the network. ADDS helps administrators securely manage this information and facilitates resource sharing and collaboration between users. Things to note: to help ensure that users can still log on to the network in case of a server outage, install a minimum of 2 domain controllers for a domain. ADDS requires a DNS server to be installed on the network. If you do not have a DNS server installed, you will be prompted to install the DNS server role on this machine. So again, just like we were saying, you have to have a DNS server in your environment. If you don't plan on using DC Win 002, then everything's going to be on DC 101, which is totally fine. There's a lot of environments where you're very limited on resources, you're very limited on budgets. You kind of have to just make do with what you've got. No problem. That's what this lab is for, to help us identify a low budget environment. And so as we can see here, it also talks about Azure Active Directory, which is a separate online service which can provide simplified identity and access management, security reporting, single sign-on to the cloud, and on-prem web apps. So eventually we will configure Office 365 with Azure AD, but again, that's going to come in a later video whenever we go deeper into the cloud platforms. Again, we have Azure, we have AWS, and we have GCP that we will be sort of investigating, seeing what cloud offers the best free tier services, which cloud provides the best low cost services, which cloud environment would be the best to use in a lab, development, or production environment. All these things, again, will be discussed in a later video. So let's just continue on with our ADDS setup. Here it gives us a breakdown of DNS. DNS stands for Domain Name System, which provides a standard method for associating names with numeric internet addresses, essentially giving it a name to its IP address. So if a server's public IP address is 198.152.1.1, it tells the world, hey, this is my public IP address. However, my association is to google.com. Just kind of throwing random numbers and random names out there. But essentially, that's what DNS does. Advertises to the world, hey, this may be my IP address, but this is my name, which I can go by, so that users can better understand. Because if we just went off IP address, I don't think anybody would be able to get to facebook.com, at least not non-technical folks. This makes it possible for users to refer to network computers by using their easy-to-remember names instead of a long series of numbers. In addition, DNS provides a hierarchical namespace, ensuring that each host name will be unique across a local or wide area network. Windows DNS services can be integrated with Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol or DHCP services on Windows, eliminating the need to add DNS records as computers are added to the network. Things to note: DNS server integration with Active Directory domain services automatically replicates DNS data along with other directory services data. Active Directory domain services requires a DNS server to be installed. Yeah, we already read that part. We're going to go and checkbox this restart if required. If a restart is required, it will auto restart. That's totally fine. So this is everything that's going to be installed. We have ADDS, DNS server, GPOs, remote server administration tools, etc., etc. Let's go and click install. So some audio got lost in the last section as I was recording, but essentially what I said was, with the roles installed, we're going to promote the server to a domain controller and make sure you select the option to add a new forest since this is a brand new machine. We're going to give it the name slothlab.local, but in production environments, always make note that you would typically use a registered domain name and not .local. However, .local works just fine since this is going to be a development environment or a lab environment, or you could call it a non-prod environment. And then here you want to make sure that you select Windows Server 2016 as both the forced functional level, domain functional level, Make sure that you've got DNS server selected, global catalog selected. You can skip over read-only domain controller. That's going to be if you've got a redundant DC. And then for the directory services restore mode password, this is to restore your DC in case of an outage or some sort of event that knocks your system offline and semi-unrecoverable, or rather makes the DC unresponsive. So we're going to give this a very basic password. We ended up giving it the same login password as before, but in typical environments, you're going to want to give this a very, very secure password and make sure that you lock it up in a safe storage location. We do want to skip over create DNS delegation, and then the NetBIOS name assigned to the DC is going to essentially just be sloth.lab. This is for legacy machines, so this is not something that you typically need to worry about in modern environments. The default database folder, log files folder, and sysvol folders are completely fine. We can just leave these as is and move on to the next step. Always make note of these system folders for SIEM integrations. Now we're going to go over the review section. This just goes over everything that we have done so far. Let the prereq checks go through. Note that once you click install, the server does automatically reboot at the end of the promotion operation. As we can see, all prereq checks have passed successfully, so we can go ahead and click install. Just note that the little yield icons are only advisory notifications and not something that you actually need to worry about. And now it shows that we're about to be signed out, so let's go ahead and close, close, and we should be good. All right, and we are back. And now we see that our domain has been created. Our domain is now called Sloth Lab. So we can go ahead. Should be able to still log in with the same built-in administrator password. For now, anyway. Like I said, we're going to be disabling the account later, but just not right now. I believe that the server also went through some essential installations. It is still installing AD DS and DNS server. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I did just need a reboot, essentially. Now that that's out of the way, we are done with promoting the server to a domain controller, as well as installing AD DS and DNS. On to the next section. So let's do a quick double take to make sure that the domain setup went through properly. We're going to verify DNS and domain setup. So as we saw on our login screen, we had slothlab/administrator. So first we're going to go to DNS Manager and check the forward lookup zone, slothlab.local. You should see the SRV records, which help systems find domain controllers and other services automatically. Optional, but recommended, you can create a reverse lookup zone to map IP addresses back to host names. This helps with auditing and logging later on. So on this server, we're going to go to the start menu and type in DNS. We could just type DNS. And we're going to click on the forward lookup zones. As we can see, we have slothlab.local. And that's, like I said, all that we really need. Let's go ahead and move on to users, groups, and OU structure. With the domain controller now fully online, let's create our organizational unit structure. So I'm going to build out a simple layout for my OUs. I'm going to be using users, groups, IT, HR, and service accounts. OUs help to logically separate users and computers. They also allow us to apply GPOs to specific groups or systems without affecting the entire domain. So in this section, we're going to create a few accounts. We're going to be creating lab user 01 as a regular user, lab admin 01 to simulate an IT administrator. So we're going to be setting the passwords and uncheck user must change password at the next login to avoid prompts in our lab. So like I said, first we're going to create IT admins, HR users, security team, and I'm actually going to prep for Waza. We're going to create a Waza reader account. This is going to be for the SIEM access later on in a couple videos. So when assigning users to groups, it's always best practice to assign permissions to groups and not individuals. This will allow us to follow the principle of least privilege, which simplifies long-term management. Because basically, one way that you can kind of think about it is when a user comes into an organization and let's say they only stay for a couple weeks, then if you manually assign permissions, it's a lot harder to go in and remove all of those individual permissions. Whereas if you assign the permissions to a specific group and then assign that user access to a group, you could simply disable their account and it completely disables all of their access going forward. So as an example, I'm going to be creating a disabled service account named SVC underscore Waza as a placeholder, which we will activate in a later episode whenever we integrate Waza with Active Directory. And so before we do all that, as you can see down here, we have no internet, which is very common after installing ADDS and DNS on your server. So we're going to go ahead and go to the Open Network and Internet Settings, and then we're going to go down to Network and Sharing Center. Let's go and click on Change Adapter Settings. As we've done before, click on Properties, go to IPv4, and we're going to make sure that we have an alternate DNS server here. So we're going to be using 8.8.8.8, which is associated to Google. Click OK, OK, and close. And so just as a test, we can ping from our firewall, which means external connectivity is fine, but the connectivity issues are going to be on the DC itself. So I think after changing those adapter settings, we may need to give the system another reboot. Let's go and click on Input, Insert Control, Delete. So as we can see down here, we are connected to the internet now, finally. Let's move on to creating those users and groups. So we're going to go to Active Directory Users and Computers. We're going to right click on New Organizational Unit. Now note that users may already be in use, and that is because it is more of a built-in thing. So now begs the question, do we use the built-in groups or should we avoid using built-in containers for long-term management? Essentially, it is best practice to always create your own organizational units so that whenever you want to apply group policies or manage users in bulk, you can do so. Note that the built-in users container, this is not an OU, it's a container. So it can hold users and groups. However, it cannot have group policies directly linked and doesn't support delegation and GPO targeting the way that OUs do. So it's my recommendation, don't use this users container, create your own so you can create something similar. So say corp users or make the OU IT, make the OU HR, something along those lines. So because of that reason, we won't be able to use this users group. So we're going to create lab users, service accounts, IT, HR, and groups OUs respectively. So we can just go into here and go to new organizational unit, and we're going to punch in lab users, create new, OU, service accounts, IT, HR, organizational unit, groups. So if you so happen to create a new OU within this users container, you can go ahead and move them out and move them directly into slothlab.local or whatever domain name that you're using. Make sure that you pull it out. However, keep default built-in accounts such as administrator, guest, KRBTGT inside the container users where they belong. So all the built-in stuff here, like administrator, all of this stuff, leave it here. Do not mess with it. Otherwise, you can break stuff. Or do whatever fits your heart's desires. So let's talk about some built-in security groups and should you use them. It is best practice to use them wherever appropriate, such as the group domain admins or enterprise admins, which are used for managing Active Directory. Be careful with these groups. Do not give them to anybody who just so happens to say, hey, I need enterprise admin role. No. Be very careful about who you give this to because you're essentially giving them the keys to the kingdom. Another group Another security group you can run into is remote desktop users. This is for granting RDP access. Again, be careful about giving this group away to other people. Account operators, backup operators, etc., such and such security groups are used for delegated tasks. Don't just dump users into administrators or domain admins unless they really need that level of access. Maintaining least privilege access across your environment is going to be your best practice. This is the same for any environment that you will be working in. Also, do not rename or delete the built-in groups. Leave them as they are. Use them as needed. So essentially what I'm saying is create your own role-based security groups. So we're going to be creating a group known as IT admins, WASA readers, HR users, and lab developers so that we can assign group policy or local policies to these groups. So again, just as a note, this is a container, not a security group. Also not an organizational unit. You can kind of make note of what is an organizational unit or not based off of if you see this little itty bitty icon on this folder. Also, knowing the difference helps whenever you're deploying a PowerShell script. A PowerShell script could be used with creating these OUs and creating users inside of the OUs. But we're going to get into that automation much later on. And now to create a user within these OUs. So we're going to right click on IT and we're going to create new user. So now let's go and give them a name. We're going to name this one lab admin. Give it the user logon lab admin01 and make sure that we uncheck user must change password at next login. And we're actually going to give this a different password because we want to make sure that we don't cross our wires anywhere. So I'm going to give this a brand new password or new password rather. So I'm just going to probably give this sloth password 1. Another reason why we're doing this is because later on, whenever we use our Kali Linux box to attack our environment and we crack the password, we're going to want to see what the password is. Because in real life environments, you're going to have your admins have a severely different password than your typical users. So go ahead and click finish, and now we can see that the ITOU now has lab admin as a user. So whenever we log out of this machine, we can actually log into lab admin. However, lab admin won't have any rights or access because we haven't granted anything just yet. So now let's right click on the groups OU, go and click on new group. So this is where we're going to be creating groups such as IT admins group. We're going to go ahead and keep the scope to global and keep this group type to security. So we're going to right click, go to properties, and then we're going to go to members and we're going to add lab admin. So go ahead and click on check name so that way it fully gets everything that is required of the name and click OK. So now we have successfully added lab admin to the IT group, to this IT admins group. So we're going to go in and add some additional users. So we're going to add new user and we're going to name this Aaron T. Sloth or Aaron the Sloth. User logon name. This is also so that we can test out different users later on whenever we pen test the environment. So now we have Aaron the Sloth. We're going to give it a very basic password. Give it code 1234. No special characters. And uncheck change password at next login. Aaron T. Sloth. We're going to go in and go to this HR group. Go new user. Call it Brittany T. Sloth for the wife. So Brit Sloth. Also going to give it a very basic password, probably just code 124 as well. And uncheck that box. So now we have a few users plus an admin, just like a real environment. So we're also going to go to this service account and we're going to add another user and we're going to name it SVC Waza. SVC underscore Waza. This is so that our Waza machine has a service account that it can utilize to access the environment. Now, typically you would want to give these service accounts a very lengthy and strong password. However, again, I'm just going to keep following my standard of a typical one capitalization, some numbers, some letters, and a special character. Also going to make sure that that's unchecked. Essentially, why you'd want to uncheck this user must change password at next login, maybe they use an application to log into the environment, and then all of a sudden everything breaks because now their password should not be their password and Windows gets confused. That's one example of why you'd want to make sure that this box gets unticked. So now we have a user in each individual OU, and then we're also going to create some new groups. So let's go ahead and create a new group for HR users. And so we want to keep this a security group. Why is that? Well, let's go into the differences of a security group versus a distribution group. So a security group, the purpose is for access control, GPO targeting, login rights, etc. So can this group be assigned permissions? Yes, security groups can. Can they be used for email? Yes, if mail enabled. If the security group is mail enabled, I should say. A distribution group, however, is for email distribution only. So can it be assigned permissions? No, it cannot. It can only be used for email. So we always want to make sure that we check the security group, not distribution. Unless, of course, you're making an email group, and then, of course, you want to make a distribution. And of course, later on, whenever we dive into Exchange or in Microsoft 365, we can mail enable these groups as needed. Because maybe IT admins doesn't need to be an email group. Maybe security admins is the email group for IT administrators. I don't know. However, some organizations decide to organize their OU structure. And then, of course, let's say, for example, you have two different IT groups. You've got your IT administrators, which handle infrastructure and systems, and then you've got your security administrators. The security administrators handle anything security related. So let's go to make a third group named Cybersecurity Team. Again, global and security are really the only two settings we need to make sure are enabled. So now, just like with IT admins, we're going to actually, I mistyped that. That should say HR users. And then we're going to add Brittany as a user within that group. We're going to add our only service account right now to the cybersecurity team. So let's just confirm, yes, Brittany T. Sloth is a member of HR users. Why is it still HR user? Properties? That's okay. We're only going to have one HR user, apparently. And so now begs the question, are we going to add the service account that we have created for Waza into the cybersecurity team? I think not, because there's some reasons why you would do so. So you want to only do this if you plan to apply the same group policy settings to the cybersecurity team group that the Waza agent would need, like audit log access or RDP rights. Or let's say you wanted to make Waza have the same access to log or monitor resources that the cybersecurity team touches. Note that you're simulating a privileged service account that belongs to the SecOps tooling suite. You're going to be using group-based permissions to delegate read access to certain logs, shares, or systems. However, we don't want to add the service account to the cybersecurity team if we want to clearly separate human users from service accounts, which is recommended for auditing purposes or least privilege purposes. And then also, we don't want to do that if we plan to assign more limited or custom permissions that directly affect service accounts, i.e., read only access to event logs or no GPOs applied. So note we're simulating principle of least privilege, where service accounts are given just enough access to do their one purpose and nothing more. So by that logic, we won't add the service account to the cybersecurity team. However, there may come a time where we need to add a new group, such as the Waza log readers, for assigning log access. Then and only then would we add the service account to that particular security group. So let's say that we know we have several service accounts that we need to create, and they're all going to have the same level of access, such as read only for logging purposes. Then we're going to create one specific group known as service accounts, and then add the service accounts OU to that group and then assign permissions as needed. Again, that's just so it's much easier to simply remove a user from the service accounts OU so that it directly impacts their particular access to the rest of the world, whereas it won't affect any other service accounts that are inside of that group. Now, for our last section, we're going to be applying basic security policies via group policy. So let's go ahead and open Group Policy Management. We're going to expand the domain. We're going to be expanding this forest out, expand the domain, and we're going to right click on IT. We're going to click on create a GPO, and we're going to name this IT security policy. So we're going to double click on this folder and we can see that the GPO is applied. However, we don't really have anything configured on it. So we're going to go ahead and expand this out and right click on the IT security policy and click on edit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set a password policy. So under computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, security settings, look for account policies, password policy. So we're going to set the minimum password length. To find this policy, we're going to set this to 12 characters and click apply. We're going to make sure that password must meet complexity requirements is enabled. Click apply. And the maximum password age is defined as 90 days. So once we set the maximum password age to 90 days, Windows will default the minimum password age to 30 days. That's fine. We're just going to leave that as is. And now we've enforced a GPO policy. So congratulations. You guys are now certified system administrators. So go out there and go apply to any sysadmin job anywhere and you should get in. So another recommended thing that we want to do is we want to rename the administrator account or the built-in administrator account. To do so, we're going to go to local security policy. So we want to go to security settings, local policies, security options, accounts, and rename the administrator. And so there's a couple different names that we could use for this account. So I'm going to go ahead and break down why we're doing this. Essentially, we're doing some system hardening. This removes the first step that most attackers will do to brute force a system. So let's say that I'm some random hacker and I decide, oh, I want to try to break into the administrator account or the built-in administrator account on a system, which is a very, very typical first step. You want to see, hey, I wonder if the administrator account has full access to the system. I want to see if this account is even active. I want to see if I can take the keys of the kingdom just by walking through the front door. So again, our first step was to go to local security policy. You can also punch in SECPOL or secpol.msc. And again, we go through local policies, security options, and we clicked on accounts, rename administrator account. So the recommended naming conventions are going to be obfuscation or security through ambiguity. So we could do something like sys backup 01. That would let our administrators know, oh, if we have a need to use a backdoor into the system, because that's essentially what the built-in administrator is, we want to use a name like sysbackup. Now, of course, you want this step to be documented so that in future use cases, whenever you do need to utilize a backdoor or a break glass account, you can do so. We could also name it something like audit ops user so that if, let's say, you needed to do an audit and you hired a third party contractor as an auditor, then you give them this account and they now have full access to the server and they can do whatever sort of auditing they need to do. We could also do something basic like call this help desk admin. This completes ambiguity. So as an attacker, I'm not going to think help desk admin is going to have very much level of access on to a system, even if I was given a list of usernames to pentest. Or let's say I knew that this environment had a login known as help desk admin. I'm still not going to think that this help desk admin user is going to have a very high level of access. Therefore, I may completely bypass it. Or if I'm efficient enough, I may test it out. But again, it's all security through ambiguity. You kind of just have to hope that attackers kind of brush past this type of naming convention. So a more realistic approach would be calling it local admin DC Win 001 or IT Support 01. Honestly, I'm thinking about naming it Lazy Root or something like that. So it's like, oh, crud, I forgot the admin account password. I'm just going to backdoor into the system myself with lazy root. But I think for lab purposes, I'm just going to call this slothdmin01. This is so that I know that this is the backdoor access into the machine. And then also as an attacker, if you decided to attack my machine, then you would have to use slothdmin01, and then that gets logged. So if I have a seam alert tuned to look for usage of slothdmin01, boom, I get an alert and I know somebody just broke into my system using backdoor access. They have keys to the kingdom. I need to shut the server down. I need to disconnect it from the network and ensure security. Note that renaming this account does not reduce privileges. It only makes it harder for attackers to guess the name of the built-in administrator account. Now, again, we're going to track this change in documentation, especially for labs, because we're going to be using tools like Waza later on. A major consideration, especially for production environments, is to completely disable the account and use domain admins instead. And then we only want to re-enable this backdoor access, I'll call it, just because it's essentially what it is. We can re-enable it later if we absolutely need to. So with that being said, how do we go about actually disabling that built-in administrator? Well, we're actually going to go back to Active Directory users and computers, and we're going to navigate to users and double click on this administrator. So again, this description, it shows that it is the built-in administrator account. We're just going to simply go to account and we're going to tick this account is disabled. This essentially breaks the built-in administrator account so nobody can ever use it. And again, we can re-enable this later on if we want to. And we want to make use of the domain admins account. Now, you only want to set this account as disabled if you have a domain admins user. We do not have one yet, so I'm going to leave this box unticked so that I don't break my access to the machine. Another option to do is disable it via PowerShell. A very simple command can do so, which I will probably go over in a later video. So best practices essentially ensure you have at least one other domain admin, such as labadmin01, for example, and then log into that new admin and verify that you have access to do high level privilege stuff as if you were the built-in administrator, and then go in and disable that built-in administrator account. And so you also want to document all of your changes. So you want to document the new users that you created. You also want to document that you have disabled the built-in administrator, etc., so forth. So also once we have our seam deployed, we can set up alerts for any re-enabling of disabled administrator accounts. This would showcase to you as a security operations analyst that, hey, we have somebody in our network that is re-enabling the built-in administrator, giving them root level access to the machine, which is a very big red flag. We can also go into the local security policy and ensure that the account's administrator account status is disabled. But again, we don't want to disable it just yet because we want to make sure that we have a domain admin user enabled and their level of access is exactly the same as the built-in administrator. So let's go ahead and do that. So first off, we're going to navigate to the OU where the privileged access accounts are going to be stored, which we've already created lab admin, but we haven't given them the proper credentials just yet. So we're going to right click on lab admin and reset password. We will need to follow the enforcement of strong password security. So we're going to give this a much stronger password. Make sure that this box is unticked and go ahead and, as best practice, unlock the user's account. So now the lab admin password has been changed. Now we're going to add this lab admin user to the domain admins group. So now we're going to right click on this user, click on properties. We're going to add them to member of add, type in domain admins, check names. And as we can see, it auto-filled it for us. Once it underlines it, you know that you've properly added the right. We're also going to add it to administrators and enterprise admins because this essentially is going to be our high tier level user. So this is going to, I guess you could call it tier 0 access. So something that has all the keys to the kingdom. So a global enterprise administrator account. And obviously we're going to lock down this account, but it's going to be an account that we use across the domain so that any machine connected to our domain will make use of this domain admin's account, and logging on the account and alerts in our SIEM are properly tuned to look for specific use of domain admins and specific use of lab admin 01. As we continue to progress in this series, all of this stuff will make more and more sense. Let's go and click apply. Okay, and now lab admin has full administrative privileges across my entire domain. So now what we're going to do is we're going to test our theory to make sure that we have properly set up this account. So we're going to click on sign out, send the Control-Alt-Delete command, and we're going to type in, we're going to click on other user. We're going to type in slothlab /lab admin01. All right. And we were able to successfully log in. Awesome. Let's go ahead and check. Active Directory. Oh, that's not what I meant. But good to know it had that access. Active Directory users and computers. So now we want to confirm that we can edit users as needed. So we can see Brittany T. Sloth, we can see lab admin, we can see lab users, managed service accounts, and regular service accounts. So we're just going to go ahead and click this service.waza. Can we edit? Yes, we can. Lab users, Aaron T. Sloth, Aaron the Sloth. Apply. Make sure that we can change passwords as needed. Reset password. Password has been changed. So yeah, we can successfully edit everything that we need to edit. Server manager, we can add rules and features if we want to. So this should essentially be all the access that we need. Let's also check that we can make changes to group memberships. So we're going to go into groups, IT admins, members, add Aaron, apply, and we're also going to subsequently remove him, apply, and no issues making these changes. So we should be good to proceed. Now we're going to disable the built-in administrator account. And so honestly, if labadmin01 can actually go through and disable the built-in administrator account, then I have no reason to believe that you can't undo it if we needed to. Now that we're in the administrator properties, we're going to go to accounts and we're going to go scroll down to account is disabled. We're going to tick that box, apply. So now that we see this down arrow on the user, we can tell that that account is locked. So we can also see that the guest user is also locked, which is what we want. We want the guest user access to also be disabled. Now again, we're going to document this change in our GitHub repo. We're going to document everything in our GitHub repo. And then also if we want extra obfuscation, sorry, I didn't mean to. Okay, that should be fine. Now, if we want extra obfuscation, we can always change this administrator name. Now, no, as best practice, we never want to delete accounts. We only want to disable them. That is so that for auditing purposes, we can go back later and confirm that, hey, this account was created at some point. This account was disabled at some point. Let's figure out when and why that happened. Whereas if you delete something, you can't get that data back and you have no idea why that account was ever created, if it was ever created at all, and why it was deleted. Because as you all know, a hacker's steps whenever they exfiltrate out of the system, they want to clean up their tracks in a sense, so that when a security team comes in to audit or check to find evidence of an attacker in their environment, they won't be able to find that evidence because the attacker cleaned up any trace that they were ever in the system to begin with. And then also, once our SIEM is in place, we're going to configure an alert for any attempt to re-enable this account. So look forward to that in the next episode. In the GitHub repo, I'm going to include an optional PowerShell method for automation. We're going to be going over automation scripts in a later video, but I do want to include them right now for the GitHub repo if you're interested, such as creating new users, adding that user to the domain admins, and then disabling the built-in administrator through PowerShell. All of these scripts are going to be in the GitHub repo. I'll also throw them down in the description below in case anybody's interested. Also, a fun thing to do, we can go back into that local security policy, navigate to local policies, security options. Under interactive logon, message title for users attempting to log in, we can add something like only authorized slots allowed. This gives some sort of legal notice to somebody attempting to log into an unauthorized machine. Or you could say something like this system is being monitored, which should also give any user the implicit, hey, you are being watched. Do not access something you are not supposed to. Because as we all know, in enterprise environments, there should be no expectation of privacy. So if you do happen to browse LinkedIn at work on your work laptop using your work Wi-Fi when you're not supposed to, you probably shouldn't do it. And so now let's force the GP update. So we're going to open up command prompt and we're going to type GP update slash force updating policy. And the policy has been completed successfully. So let's go ahead and give the system a quick reboot. As we can see, it's applying the computer settings. Go and send our control-alt-delete command. And we're still using the lab admin. We can confirm that since we're using a completely different password. And then let's also go ahead and check the built-in administrator and make sure that it is actually disabled. Click other user, slothlab administrator. As we can see, we don't have the ability to log back into it. That's fine. This is what we want. And again, later on, we're going to test that theory with the Kali Linux attack box. But the domain admin that we just created should have all the access that we need. And that's it. We've now fully configured our Active Directory domain controller, complete with structured users, groups, OUs, and foundational security policies. This setup mirrors exactly what you'd find in a real-world enterprise environment, and it's ready to scale. In the next episode, we're going to be deploying Waza, which is an open source SIEM, or Security Information Event Management System. And we're going to be connecting it to our AD environment so that we can monitor logins, GPO changes, and detect anomalies in real time. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you're following along, make sure to check out the GitHub repo where I've included setup checklists and templates. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions or want to see special features added in future episodes. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode.